The city hummed like a restless heart that evening. Limousines lined the marble steps of the Grand Marlowe Hotel, where the annual Spotlight Gala glittered brighter than a constellation. Inside, chandeliers spilled golden light over gowns stitched with diamonds. Tuxedos pressed to perfection, and a sea of powerful men and women hungry for prestige. Adrian Cole emerged from his black Bentley with a smile sculpted for the cameras. At 52, he still carried the aura of a man who had conquered his world. His salt-and-pepper hair, slicked back with practiced precision, framed a face that had once been on magazine covers. The visionary investor, the king of luxury real estate. Tonight, the headlines would once again be his, or so he believed. Beside him, Celeste Cole stepped gracefully from the car. At 29, she was the embodiment of elegance. A pearl satin gown hugging her tall frame, a diamond necklace shimmering against her pale skin. She clutched his arm like a devoted partner, her smile unwavering as paparazzi shouted their names. "Mr. Cole, this way, please. Adrian, over here. With your wife." Flashes erupted like small explosions, freezing them in moments of fabricated perfection. Adrian lifted his chin, nodding, waving, every move rehearsed. His hand squeezed Celeste's lightly, a gesture both protective and controlling. Inside the ballroom, champagne fountains sparkled under crystal light. Violins played a delicate waltz as servers weaved through the crowd with silver trays. Celebrities mingled with senators, CEOs with art collectors, each conversation a performance in its own right. Adrian glided among them as though he owned the floor. His laughter rang a note too sharp, his compliments just slightly overpolished. But only he felt the strain. Beneath the tuxedo, beneath the mask of a man adored, a muscle twitched at his jaw. It's just another night, he told himself. Another spotlight, another performance. Celeste's voice pulled him back. Did this story leave an impact? Please like, share, and comment your location. We'd love to know. "You're restless," she whispered, her lips barely moving as she leaned toward him. He turned his smile on her, the same smile that had charmed investors, boardrooms, even her. Restless? No, my darling, merely excited, but she felt the tension in his grip. She noticed how often his eyes flicked toward the entrance, scanning, waiting. For what, she couldn't guess, but it gnawed at her. A shadow across the glitter. Narration carried the weight of his thoughts. The past is buried, he reminded himself. Tonight is about power, about image. Nothing can touch me here. And yet every sound seemed to pierce deeper than it should. The clink of champagne glasses, the sudden burst of laughter from a rival table, even the faint echo of heels clicking across marble. His chest tightened with something he refused to name. Dread. Celeste excused herself to greet a senator's wife, leaving Adrian alone by the fountain. For a moment the performance slipped. He exhaled sharply, tugging at his cufflink, eyes dark with the truth no one else could see. "You wear it well, Adrian," a voice said behind him. He spun, finding an old associate half smiling. Adrian smirked back, slipping into his role once more. "Always have, always will." The man chuckled, but Adrian barely heard. His focus shifted again to the ballroom doors. Each time they opened, his pulse thudded. He drained half a glass of champagne, forcing calm, forcing charm, forcing himself to believe this night would hold no ghosts. From across the room, Celeste studied him. To the world he was magnetic, untouchable. But she saw the tremor in his hand, the stiffness in his smile. Something was wrong, something he hadn't told her. The violin swelled and guests gathered toward the main stage. A new arrival was expected, someone of importance, the announcer hinted. Adrian's heart thudded in sync with the music. His mask held firm, but the man beneath was fraying, and when the ballroom doors finally creaked open, he felt the air shift. The night had only begun. The ballroom shimmered with wealth and vanity. Chandeliers dripped golden light across mirrored walls, throwing reflections of gowns and jewels into infinite repetition. Yet beneath the music and laughter, a quieter current stirred, one that clung to Adrian Cole's name like perfume too strong to ignore. Celeste drifted through the crowd with a flute of champagne in hand, her smile a shield. She had learned early in her marriage that silence was sometimes safer than questions, but tonight silence carried a cost. Everywhere she turned, voices folded around her husband's past. "He looks well for his age, doesn't he?" one woman murmured, half hidden behind a fan. Yes, though I hear he wasn't always so generous, another replied, her eyes darting toward Adrian. Celeste's smile faltered for only a heartbeat. She tilted her head, pretending not to notice. The music swelled, but the whispers cut sharper than strings. She joined a small circle near the velvet curtains where two investors' wives leaned close, speaking low. Tragic, really. A woman left to fend for herself. And those children? Hush, the other warned quickly. Not here. The abrupt silence left Celeste more unsettled than the words themselves. She felt the weight of eyes upon her, then the quick retreat of gazes when she turned. Narration carried her thoughts. Children? What children? He never spoke of them. He never spoke of anyone before me at all. Adrian, meanwhile, played his role to perfection. Across the room he held court by the champagne fountain, his laughter booming, his hand gestures practiced, but Celeste saw the stiffness behind his charm. Each time the doors opened, he tensed. Each time someone mentioned his name too softly. His eyes darted. The spotlight above the stage caught his tuxedo just right, but to Celeste, it seemed less like a crown and more like interrogation. She moved closer to him, her heels echoing against polished marble. He turned just in time to catch her expression, poised but edged with doubt. "Enjoying yourself, darling?" he asked smoothly. Her lips parted, then closed. Instead of a question, she offered a smile. "Of course. Everyone seems fascinated with you." For a fraction of a second, his mask slipped. The twitch at his jaw returned. He pressed a kiss to her cheek, more for the cameras than for her. "They always are," he said. But unease crept into her bloodstream. Heavy as the champagne she barely sipped. She replayed the fragments, left to fend for herself. Children. Tragic. The descriptions around her grew cinematic, laughter echoing off marble, perfumes mingling thick in the air, silver trays clattering faintly as servers slipped between bodies. Yet beneath the opulence something rotten pulsed. Celeste excused herself to the powder room, needing air, needing clarity. Inside, the mirrors multiplied her reflection a dozen times, each one slightly distorted by the glass. She hardly recognized the woman staring back, a flawless wife draped in pearls but with a flicker of fear in her eyes. She steadied herself. "It's just envy," she told her reflection. "Jealous women spinning stories. That's all." Yet even as she thought it, her stomach knotted. Because envy did not usually come with such precision. Envy did not whisper about children. Back in the ballroom, the music paused as an announcer's voice rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a very special guest." The guests shifted, craning their necks toward the entrance. Adrian's smile froze as if he already knew what awaited him. Celeste's hand tightened around her glass, her pulse quickening without reason she could name. The great doors opened, and the whispers became silence. The ballroom doors groaned open, their carved oak panels splitting apart like the first scene of a play. A hush fell instantly. Music stilled, conversations froze, even the champagne flute seemed to pause mid-air. All eyes turned toward the threshold, and there she was, Serena Cole. Adrian's ex-wife stepped into the blaze of chandeliers with a poise that silenced the room more effectively than any announcement could. Her skin glowed beneath the soft lights, her ebony gown flowing like liquid night, catching gold at every fold. She had aged, yes, but gracefully, like marble shaped by time into something even more formidable. Beside her walked 3 children, triplets, 2 boys in tailored black suits, a girl in an ivory dress with a satin sash. Their faces, oval cheeks, sharp brows, a particular dimple that appeared when they blinked shyly at the crowd, were mirrors. Not of Serena. Not entirely, but of Adrian. Gasps rippled across the gala floor like breaking glass. Some guests leaned forward, whispering fiercely. Others clutched their pearls, pretending not to stare. And yet the resemblance was undeniable. Celeste's hand, perched delicately on Adrian's arm, tightened until her nails grazed fabric. She smiled, porcelain perfect, but her eyes hardened. Her breath barely reached her chest. Adrian froze. His carefully trained grin cracked for a second too long. His jaw twitched, his throat worked in silence. He managed a laugh, but it came out dry, hollow. "What in God's name?" he muttered under his breath. Serena's gaze swept the room, unhurried. She didn't search for him. She knew exactly where he stood. When her eyes locked on Adrian, they did not soften nor flare with anger. They simply held him, steady, merciless. The narration turned heavy, psychological. He had spent years burying her, years scrubbing his name clean, building a palace with another woman at his side. And here she was walking into his temple, carrying proof that his past had never been erased. The children clung closer as the crowd parted to let them pass. One of the boys whispered to his sister, who nodded nervously. The girl's curls bounced as she tilted her head, exactly like Adrian's had when he was their age. The resemblance made the whisper sharper, more venomous. My God, they look just like him. No mistaking it. And his wife is right there. Poor thing. Celeste held her smile, but her knuckles whitened. Adrian, she whispered, her lips barely moving. What are they talking about? Who are they? His response was delayed, his voice low and rough. Nobody. Just ignore it. But there was no ignoring. Serena was gliding closer. The descriptions tightened, heels clicking against marble, the sweep of her gown echoing like thunder beneath velvet music. Guests shifted aside, forming a reluctant aisle. Adrian stood rooted as though the floor had chained him. When Serena reached the center, she stopped. The triplets lined up instinctively at her side, their small shoulders squared. Their presence demanded attention, not pity. Adrian's breath quickened. Sweat gathered beneath his collar. He tried to step forward, but Celeste's hand held him back, not protectively, possessively. She wanted answers, not escape. The silence cracked when Serena spoke, her voice low but carrying across the hall. It's been a long time, Adrian. Every head turned back to him. Celeste's lips parted, her expression faltering, but the cameras flashing from the corner demanded her composure. She smiled again, though the light in her eyes flickered with betrayal she didn't yet understand. Adrian swallowed hard, his throat dry. He forced a chuckle. Serena? What? What a surprise. The words rang false. Narration pressed harder. He had spent fortunes to keep her away. Signed documents, arranged payments, ensured silence. Yet here she was, not broken, not begging, but radiant, unafraid. With living proof at her side, Celeste's smile cracked, her hand trembling on his arm. Adrian, she said quietly, voice edged with panic. Why do they look like you? He didn't answer. Couldn't. His silence screamed louder than any confession. The triplets stared at him with the unfiltered gaze of children meeting a stranger who was not a stranger at all. Their eyes, his eyes, asked questions he had spent years avoiding. The whispers swelled again, uglier now, insistent, unstoppable. And as the orchestra tried in vain to resume a tune, the glittering gala had shifted. It was no longer Adrian's night. It was hers. Serena had arrived, and with her the truth he could not escape. The spotlight above burned hotter, heavier. Adrian felt it sear his skin, and Celeste, standing beside him, realized the performance was over. For a long moment the ballroom seemed suspended in glass. Every whisper, every breath, every flicker of light felt amplified. Serena said nothing, but she didn't have to. The three children at her side carried the testimony no court could deny. The triplets stood with quiet dignity, their small frames casting shadows that stretched toward Adrian. Each detail was impossible to dismiss. The arch of their brows, the angular cut of their jawlines, even the faint curl in the boy's hair that matched Adrian's in his youth. The room saw it, and the room would not forget. Adrian forced his lips into what he thought was a smile, though it trembled at the edges. His glass of champagne wobbled in his hand, bubbles fizzing against crystal like tiny explosions. He tried to appear calm, but his body betrayed him. A bead of sweat slipped from his temple, cutting a line down his face. Hold steady. Don't let them see it, he told himself. But the weight of the triplets' gaze drilled through every wall he had built. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their murmurs threading through the air like smoke. They're his image, no doubt about it. What will she do? Poor Celeste. The last word struck Celeste like a shard of glass. She stood frozen, her grip on Adrian's arm rigid. Her smile, carefully sculpted for the cameras, faltered at the edges. She glanced from her husband to the children, and though her lips curved upward, her eyes revealed something else entirely. Dawning horror. Phones lifted discreetly, then brazenly. Flashes sparked across the room, capturing Serena's stillness, Adrian's unease, and Celeste's porcelain mask cracking in real time. The evidence was no longer confined to whispers. It was being immortalized. Celeste whispered without looking at him. "Say something." Adrian cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice too loud, too forced. "This gala is about the future, about unity." His words scattered like glass marbles on marble floors, meaningless and hollow. The children's eyes remained on him, unblinking. Narration pressed in. He had denied them in boardrooms, dismissed them in contracts, erased them from his speeches. Yet here they were, living proof that the past does not stay buried. The younger boy tilted his head ever so slightly, mimicking the exact way Adrian did when calculating a deal. The crowd noticed. The resemblance was uncanny, merciless. Adrian's hand twitched at his side. Celeste's voice cut quietly again. "Who are they, Adrian?" He didn't answer. Instead, he adjusted his cufflink, his body language screaming guilt in the language of gestures. The cameras clicked louder. Guests leaned closer. Even the orchestra faltered, their instruments lowering one by one. It was no longer a gala. It was a spectacle, and Adrian was the unwilling centerpiece. Serena still hadn't spoken. She didn't need to. She rested a hand lightly on her daughter's shoulder, a simple gesture of calm. The girl's gaze never left Adrian, her small chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Those eyes, Adrian thought bitterly. My eyes, my curse. The narration darkened. He had built an empire on deception, but children's faces are not contracts you can shred. They speak even when silent. They accuse without words, and they strip a man bare in front of the world. Celeste turned her head slowly toward him, her expression no longer simply poised. There was steel in her voice now, though she kept it low. "Don't you dare lie to me." Her hand slipped from his arm, leaving him exposed, unsupported. The gesture was small, but the meaning rang through him like a verdict. Flashes continued. Whispers grew, and Adrian realized the glittering world he had fought to control was slipping. Serena met his gaze once more, unblinking, unflinching. She gave him nothing, no words, no mercy, only the truth reflected in the faces of their children. The silence, louder than any accusation, pressed down on him until the room itself seemed to close in. And then, slowly, Serena took a step forward. The orchestra resumed, playing softly as if trying to sweep tension beneath its notes. Guests returned to murmuring, though their eyes kept flicking toward the woman in black and the children by her side. Adrian knew the cameras were still on him, still devouring every twitch of his expression. He could not let this spectacle grow, so he moved. With a hand at Celeste's back, firm, almost too firm, he steered her away from the center of the ballroom, away from the glare. Serena followed, unhurried, her gown whispering against marble as though the room itself made space for her. The triplets remained behind, watched carefully by a trusted family friend who had accompanied them. Serena wanted this moment with Adrian alone. Adrian led Celeste down a side corridor lined with velvet curtains, the music dulled to a muffled hum, the light dimming until only golden sconces lit the narrow path. He stopped near an alcove half hidden in shadow. Celeste turned to him, her eyes demanding. But before he could summon words, Serena appeared at the end of the corridor. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough to strip the air of oxygen. When she reached them, she stood a breath away, her eyes fixed on Adrian's. She let the silence linger, a weapon sharper than steel. Then finally her voice came, low, controlled, devastating. "You left us with nothing." The words cut deeper than any public accusation. They were not meant for the crowd. They were meant for him. Her tone carried years of abandonment, the bitterness of nights alone, and the cold resolve of a woman who had survived despite it all. Adrian's mouth opened, ready with his usual arsenal, deflection, charm, dismissal. But under her gaze, the rehearsed lines faltered. His throat tightened. "Serena," he said, forcing a smile. "This isn't the time or the place." Her laugh was humorless, a blade drawn in the dark. "The place? The place is perfect. The world needs to see you for what you are." Celeste stiffened. She looked from one to the other, confusion sharpening into fear. "What is she talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. Adrian turned quickly. She's trying to make a scene, that's all. Ignore her." But Celeste caught the crack in his voice, the flicker of panic he couldn't suppress. Serena stepped closer, shadows painting her features in stark lines. You abandoned your children, Adrian. You buried us under silence while you built castles with someone new. You called it moving on. I call it cruelty. Her words echoed off the velvet curtains too sharp to be muffled. Adrian felt the walls closing in. He shook his head, his hands twitching at his sides. That isn't true. You know it isn't. But denial lacked conviction when sweat beaded at his temples, when his eyes darted away like a guilty man. Celeste saw it. She heard it in the quiver of his voice. Children? She whispered. Adrian, what children? Her question struck harder than Serena's accusation. It was not shouted, not dramatic, but spoken in disbelief, in betrayal. Celeste's voice trembled like glass about to break. Adrian reached for her hand, but she pulled back. His gestures, once commanding, looked desperate now. His mask was slipping. Narration pressed down. This was the moment he had always feared. Not the whispers, not the rumors, but the collision of his two worlds. And here in the velvet shadows he could no longer perform. The power he carried in boardrooms and ballrooms dissolved into something raw and fragile. Guilt. Serena's eyes did not soften. Look at me, Adrian. Look at them. They are yours. You can't hide from blood. Adrian's silence stretched until it became confession. His chest rose and fell sharply, but no words came. Celeste's face paled. She swayed slightly as though the ground beneath her had shifted. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold, steady. You lied to me. Adrian reached for her again, but she stepped back, leaving his hand suspended in the air like a verdict. The weight of it crushed him more than Serena's accusation. Behind them, the muffled orchestra swelled into a new song, but the melody could not cover the fracture that had just opened. And as Serena turned slowly, retreating back toward the ballroom where her children waited, Adrian stood in silence, hollow and stripped. His empire had been wounded not by scandal alone, but by the truth finally spoken aloud. Celeste's eyes did not leave him. Her silence was its own accusation, and for the first time in years, Adrian Cole felt powerless. The limousine ride home was suffocating. Celeste sat rigid in her seat, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the blur of city lights sliding past the tinted windows. Adrian beside her scrolled through his phone with exaggerated calm, pretending to catch up on messages, but the twitch at his temple betrayed him. Neither spoke. The silence between them was heavier than the Gala's whispers, pressing into Celeste's ribs until her breath caught shallow. The children's faces haunted her, the same dimple, the same jawline, the same piercing eyes. No denial Adrian could conjure would erase that image. When they finally reached their penthouse, Celeste stepped out first. The elevator ride was unbearable, each floor rising like a countdown to war. By the time they entered the glass-walled living room overlooking the city, her composure cracked. She turned on him, voice sharp. How long were you planning to keep this from me? Adrian slipped off his jacket, tossing it across the leather sofa with forced nonchalance. You're overreacting. Her laugh was bitter, jagged. Overreacting? You stood in that ballroom with 3 children who look exactly like you, and you expect me to believe this is nothing? He loosened his tie, pouring himself a drink at the bar. His voice was smooth, calculated, but it no longer carried the power it once had over her. Serena's staging a performance. She's always been manipulative. She knew tonight was important and she wanted to humiliate me. That's all this is, a ploy for money. Celeste stared at him, incredulous. The gaslight flickered, but her instincts fought the flame. A ploy? She whispered. Adrian, those were children. Your children? He slammed his glass onto the counter, whiskey sloshing. Don't you dare say that. They're not mine. But his voice cracked on the last word, betraying him. Celeste stepped closer, her eyes burning. Then why did you look at them like you'd seen ghosts? Narration deepened. Celeste had married a man who built empires from lies polished into truth. He had charmed her, dazzled her, wrapped her in wealth until she no longer questioned. But tonight the veil tore, and behind it stood a man she did not recognize, a coward hiding behind denial. Adrian's shoulders slumped slightly. He turned away, staring at the glittering skyline beyond the glass walls. You don't understand. Serena was toxic. She wanted to destroy me. I left because I had to. Celeste's voice cut through the air. And the children? Did you leave them because you had to as well? His silence stretched long enough to confirm what he wouldn't admit. Celeste's chest tightened, anger surging beneath the weight of betrayal. She shook her head, tears threatening but refused entry. You built this life with me on a lie. Every promise, every word, it was all a mask. Was I just another piece of your empire? Another way to polish your reputation? Adrian finally turned, his face hardened. I gave you everything. This home, this name, this life. And you're standing there ready to throw it away because my ex-wife paraded children in front of you? Her voice rose, trembling but unyielding. Because the truth was paraded in front of me, and you can't even admit it. The room thickened with silence again, broken only by the faint hum of the city below. Adrian downed the rest of his whiskey, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. Celeste backed away, her chest heaving. She no longer recognized the man before her. The empire glittering around them felt less like safety and more like a gilded prison. Narration closed in. Something inside her shifted. She would no longer swallow lies disguised as love. She would no longer silence her instincts. Whatever Adrian thought he could control, she was no longer part of his performance. Celeste turned toward the hallway, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her voice trailed behind her, steady, cutting. If you won't tell me the truth, I'll find it myself. Her footsteps faded into the shadows, leaving Adrian alone with his drink, his reflection warped in the glass walls, and for the first time, he wondered if his carefully rebuilt empire was about to collapse from the inside. The next morning dawned pale and gray, the kind of light that seemed to strip glamour from everything it touched. Celeste sat at the kitchen table long after Adrian had left for a meeting, her untouched coffee cooling in its cup. The night's confrontation replayed in her head, his denials, his cracks, his silence. The image of the triplets haunted her most of all. She had promised herself she wouldn't look the other way anymore. When Adrian's voice still echoed through her memory, swearing Serena was manipulative, her instincts screamed louder. If he won't tell me the truth, I'll uncover it myself. By mid-afternoon, Celeste found herself seated at a mahogany desk inside the county courthouse. The air smelled of dust and old paper, the walls lined with rows of legal files stacked like tombstones of broken promises. She adjusted her sunglasses and lowered her voice, asking the clerk for records under Adrian's name. The clerk hesitated, flipping through the computer system. Some of these are sealed, she said softly. Divorce filings, financial records, restricted access. Celeste leaned in, her tone calm but firm. I'm his wife. That should be enough. Minutes stretched before the clerk finally slid a thin stack of documents across the counter. Celeste's pulse quickened as she carried them to a quiet corner, her hands trembling as she turned the first page. Narration sharpened. Every empire has its foundation. Adrian's, she realized, was not built on vision but on concealment. And now the cracks were surfacing. The divorce papers were the first wound. Legal jargon detailed Adrian's separation from Serena 8 years ago. Custody filings painted a darker picture. Serena had petitioned for support, but payments had been contested, delayed, then abruptly silenced. A line stamped in bold red caught Celeste's eye. Case sealed by court order. Her stomach dropped. Sealed cases meant money, power, secrets bought into silence. She kept reading. Bank statements attached to the file told their own story. Large withdrawals routed through obscure accounts. Payments to shell corporations. Transfers that vanished without explanation. The numbers bled across the pages like evidence of a crime. Her breath grew shallow as she pieced it together. Adrian hadn't just walked away. He had erased them, smothered them with financial maneuvers until Serena had no choice but to disappear. The triplets had grown up in the shadows of his empire, traded for reputation. Celeste pressed a hand to her mouth. Anger rose inside her, sharp and burning. She had believed she was chosen, special, the woman who completed his carefully polished image. Instead, she was merely the replacement, a mask to hide the rot beneath. She flipped through the final file, her eyes catching on a note scribbled in the margin by a judge. Repeated non-payment indicates willful neglect. Custodial stability endangered. But instead of consequences, the case had vanished into silence. The truth clawed at her chest. Adrian had not been the victim of Serena's bitterness. He had orchestrated their ruin. A whisper of footsteps behind her startled her. She quickly gathered the papers, sliding them back into their folder. The clerk's eyes flicked curiously toward her, but Celeste forced a smile and left the courthouse with the weight of revelation pressing against her ribs. Outside, the city bustled, oblivious. She clutched the file close to her chest as though it might vanish. Narration closed tightly. She had proof now, proof of betrayal deeper than adultery. Adrian hadn't just abandoned children. He had purchased silence with stolen futures. And soon, that silence would end. As she stepped into a waiting cab, her reflection in the window caught her eye. She no longer looked like a wife basking in luxury. She looked like a woman preparing for war. The cab dropped Celeste at a quiet cafe tucked off a side street, far from the glare of the city's center. Serena had chosen the place deliberately. Low lights, no cameras, no curious eyes. Celeste entered with the courthouse file clutched in her bag, her pulse thrumming. She spotted Serena at a corner table, her black coat draped elegantly around her shoulders, a mug of tea cooling before her. For a moment, Celeste hesitated. Here sat the woman who had turned her world inside out. Yet as she approached, she saw not an enemy but a survivor. Serena's eyes carried exhaustion, yes, but also a steeliness that told of battles fought long before tonight. Serena looked up. You came. Celeste sat, her voice clipped. I need answers. Serena's lips pressed into a thin line. She stirred her tea once, then set the spoon down with care as though bracing herself. Narration carried the weight. For years she had been silent, locked out of society by Adrian's power. Tonight, silence was no longer protection, it was poison. Serena's voice trembled at first. When I met him, I believed in him. He was brilliant, magnetic. He convinced me we were building something together, an empire, a family. But behind closed doors, the charm rotted. He wanted control of everything, my money, my choices, even my body. Celeste's throat tightened. She gripped the edge of the table, urging her to continue. When I found out I was pregnant, he changed. At first, he promised the world. Mansions, security, love. But the moment he learned it was 3, not 1, he unraveled. He said I would drag him down, that 3 mouths would ruin his future. Serena's eyes glistened, though her voice steadied with resolve. The night the children were born, he didn't come. No flowers, no calls. Just a note from his lawyer. He vanished. He told the world I had lied, that the children weren't his, and then he buried me. Do you know what it's like to raise 3 children alone while watching their father become richer by the day? Celeste shook her head, her breath shallow. He told me you were bitter. That you wanted money. Serena gave a hollow laugh. Money? I begged him only for what they needed. School, food, a roof. Instead, he paid judges, sealed files, and made sure every door closed in my face. When I went to court, they looked at me like I was the fraud, because he had already written the story. Celeste's chest burned. She reached into her bag, pulling out the folder. She slid it across the table. I've seen the records, the withdrawals, the sealed orders. He bought silence. Yours. Serena's hand rested on the folder, but she didn't open it. I didn't take the money for myself. I took it because I had no choice. It was the only way to keep them safe, to keep food on the table. But I swore one day I would show him. Not for revenge. For them. The weight of her words sank deep. Celeste saw the years of pain etched into Serena's face, but she also saw strength, the kind born of survival. Narration pressed harder. In that moment, Celeste realized Adrian's empire was not only built on lies, it was built on the bones of those he discarded. She had been his mask, but Serena had been his foundation, and he had shattered her without hesitation. Celeste whispered, her voice trembling. I married a stranger. Serena's gaze softened for the first time. No, you married the same man I did. You're only now seeing the truth. The words landed like a final verdict. Celeste leaned back, her pulse racing, her vision sharp with new clarity. The mask had slipped, and she could never unsee the man beneath. The cafe door opened, a gust of cold air sweeping in. Serena looked toward the street where her children waited, then back at Celeste. You know now. The question is, what will you do with it? Celeste followed her gaze to the window. The triplets stood outside with their caretaker, their eyes wide, their presence undeniable. And in that instant, her decision crystallized. She would no longer be complicit in Adrian's deception. Celeste waited until nightfall. The penthouse sat high above the city, glass walls framing a skyline that shimmered like a false promise. Adrian returned later than usual. his tie undone, his breath smelling faintly of whiskey. He walked in with the swagger of a man still convinced he owned the room. But Celeste was waiting in the living room, phone hidden inside her clutch, recording app open. Her pulse drummed steady in her ears. "You're home late," she said evenly. Adrian glanced at her, then poured himself another drink. Board ran long. "You wouldn't understand," her voice sharpened. "No. What I don't understand is how you can stand in front of me, deny everything when I've seen the truth with my own eyes." He froze mid-pour. "What truth?" Celeste rose slowly, stepping closer. "The court records, the sealed files, the payments you buried to erase them. You lied to me, Adrian. To everyone." For the first time his composure faltered. He set the glass down hard, the sound echoing. His jaw clenched, his voice low and venomous. "You went digging where you shouldn't have." Her heart thudded, but she pressed on. "You abandoned them, your children. And you thought no one would ever find out." Adrian's laugh was sharp, hollow. "Abandoned? I freed myself. Do you know what it means to be chained to weakness? To mediocrity?" Serena was nothing. "Those kids," he stopped, catching himself, but the words had already spilled. Narration cut in. The mask was slipping. Every syllable was evidence, and her phone, recording silently in her clutch, caught it all. Celeste's voice trembled, though she held steady. "Say it. Say they're yours." Adrian's face darkened. "Blood doesn't make family. Power does. And I chose this life, not that one. Serena can parade her bastards all she wants. They'll never take what's mine." The words came out raw, unfiltered, damning. Celeste recoiled, disgust flooding her. The man who had once charmed her with roses and whispered promises now stood revealed. Cruel, desperate, venomous. Adrian stepped closer, his presence looming. "Don't test me, Celeste. You enjoy the life I built, the gowns, the penthouse, the respect. All of it exists because I cut ties when I had to. Without me, you're nothing." Her chest tightened, but she refused to break. "If I'm nothing without you, why are you so afraid of the truth?" His fury snapped. He slammed his hand against the glass wall, the city lights trembling in fractured reflections. "Because truth ruins men like me, and I'll destroy anyone who threatens what I built. Do you hear me? Anyone?" Celeste's hand tightened around her clutch, steadying the phone inside. Every word was captured, every threat sealed. She stepped back, her voice calmer now, controlled. "You've already destroyed yourself." His breathing was ragged, sweat gathering at his brow. The mask of the charming millionaire was gone. What stood before her was the raw, unvarnished man, afraid, dangerous, hollow. Narration pressed in. She had what she needed. His own words, his own fury, his own confession. Love had turned into evidence, and the empire of lies was now paper thin. Adrian turned away, pacing, muttering under his breath. Celeste quietly slipped her clutch shut, the recording safe. Her pulse slowed, clarity cutting through the fear. For the first time, she no longer felt like his ornament. She felt like his undoing. The city lights beyond the glass flickered like stars on the edge of collapse. Adrian poured another drink, unaware that his downfall had already begun. And Celeste, silent, steady, walked down the hallway toward their bedroom, carrying proof that would shatter his world. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, a place where reputations came to be stripped clean. Rows of polished benches were filled with reporters, their pens poised like blades, waiting to capture every fall from grace. Cameras were banned inside, but the frenzy outside had already painted Adrian Cole as the scandal of the season. Celeste sat near the front, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Beside her, Serena adjusted her blazer, her posture upright, her jaw firm. Two women, one current wife, one ex, bound not by rivalry anymore but by truth. The air between them was taut but no longer hostile. They both had scars Adrian had carved, and they were here to watch him answer for them. When the bailiff called his name, Adrian entered through the side door, flanked by lawyers. He wore his best suit, but the fabric sagged on him, as though even the tailoring had given up. His face was pale, his eyes restless. The mask he once wore so flawlessly no longer fit. The judge's gavel cracked the air. This court will now hear the case of Adrian Cole, charged with fraud, financial misconduct, and abandonment. Adrian's lawyers launched into arguments, painting him as a visionary misunderstood, a man targeted by bitter enemies. But the evidence weighed heavier than rhetoric. Celeste's secret recording was submitted. The jury leaned forward as his voice filled the courtroom. Venomous, arrogant, damning. Serena can parade her bastards all she wants. They'll never take what's mine. The words echoed, undeniable. Adrian shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening as whispers spread across the room. Narration pressed in. The empire he had built on image and control was crumbling, not from an enemy's attack but from his own tongue, his own pride. His own cruelty laid bare. The prosecution presented bank records, withdrawals, shell accounts, sealed payments, all leading back to Adrian. Serena's testimony followed. She spoke not with bitterness but with clarity. I did not come here for money. I came because my children deserve the truth. They deserve a father who does not erase them. Her voice trembled once, but she steadied it, her strength undeniable. The courtroom hung on her words. Even Celeste, sitting only inches away, felt the weight of her courage. Adrian's eyes darted to Celeste, hoping for solidarity, but found only steel. When she was called to the stand, her voice was measured, precise. I believed in my husband. I defended him. I lived in the world he built. But that world was a lie. He told me Serena was manipulative, that the children were not his. And then he confessed in his own words who he truly was. The jury's faces hardened. The judge took notes silently, lips pressed thin. Adrian's lawyer rose in desperation, trying to cast both women as bitter conspirators. But the narrative collapsed under evidence. Every denial had a receipt. Every performance had a crack. The climax came when the prosecutor turned to Adrian. Mr. Cole, do you deny those are your children? Adrian straightened, trying to summon his old charm. I deny nothing. I built my life the way I saw fit. Sacrifices were necessary. Great men are never understood in their time. The arrogance hung in the air like smoke. The jury did not see greatness. They saw hubris. The judge's gavel struck again. This court finds sufficient grounds for charges of fraud, neglect, and willful abandonment to proceed to sentencing. The room erupted in murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing the fall of a man once untouchable. Celeste exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Serena closed her eyes briefly, her hand brushing against the bench as though grounding herself. Two women once divided now sat side by side, not in triumph but in survival. Narration sealed the moment. The trial was not only about a man's crimes. It was the trial of two marriages, one discarded, one deceived, bound together by the truth that finally stood unchained. Adrian was led away, his eyes still searching for someone to believe in him. But no one met his gaze. And in the silence that followed, both women knew the story was no longer his. The verdict reverberated across the city like a drumbeat. Adrian Cole, once the man gracing magazine covers, praised as a financial visionary, was sentenced to prison for fraud, neglect, and willful abandonment. The courtroom emptied, leaving behind only echoes of his arrogance. But outside, the world had already shifted. Newspapers that once celebrated his rise now printed headlines dripping with irony. Empire of lies, millionaire father exposed. The fall of Adrian Cole. His wealth no longer defined him, his betrayal did. Photos of the triplets, their resemblance undeniable, appeared on every front page. The story had turned and the spotlight no longer flattered him. It condemned him. Serena walked from the courthouse with her head held high. She wore no jewels, no gown, only a simple coat that spoke of dignity. Microphones crowded her path, reporters calling her name. She paused once, her voice calm but firm. This is not about me. It's about 3 children who deserve the truth. Now they have it. The words traveled farther than she expected. For years, she had been erased, her story buried under sealed documents and whispered lies. Now she was no longer invisible. Celeste left quietly, slipping into the back seat of a waiting car. She did not need the cameras. She did not need the flash. Her freedom was quieter. A weight lifted from her chest, a mask she no longer had to wear. For the first time, she breathed without the fear of Adrian's shadow pressing against her. Narration pressed in. She had been his ornament, his alibi, his perfect mask. But now she was herself again, Celeste no longer chained to a man's empire. The lies that once bound her had shattered, and in their place came clarity. At home she packed slowly, not with despair but with resolve. She placed gowns into boxes, slipped wedding photos into drawers she no longer needed. Every object she folded away felt like a step closer to herself. The triplets became the story's center. No longer hidden, no longer burdened by denial, they carried a name that now belonged to them without shame. Schools, neighbors, and strangers would see them not as rumors, but as children with truth on their side. Their laughter rang louder, freer, as though even they felt the chains had broken. The press swirled for weeks dissecting Adrian's downfall, but the women who survived him refused to linger in that storm. Serena poured her focus into rebuilding a life for her children, secure, steady, free of manipulation. Celeste considered her own future, her own strength. She no longer asked what Adrian had made of her. She asked only what she would make of herself. One evening, as the city lights glimmered beyond Serena's modest apartment window, she and Celeste sat together at a kitchen table. No cameras, no microphones. Only two women who had once been divided, now bound by shared survival. Serena poured tea. Celeste accepted it. No words were needed. The silence between them was no longer heavy with suspicion, but with understanding. Narration sealed the moment. The spotlight had shifted. It no longer illuminated Adrian's empire, but the women who had endured his shadow. Their strength became the story. Their survival the headline. And in that quiet strength a new beginning stirred. Far away in his cell, Adrian still clung to the illusion of control. But outside those walls, life moved on without him. A year later, the spotlight gala glittered once more. The chandeliers still dripped golden light. The marble floors still echoed with polished shoes, and the champagne still poured like liquid wealth. But something in the air had shifted. The night no longer belonged to Adrian Cole. His name was spoken only in past tense, like a cautionary tale whispered at the edges of conversation. This year, the story was different. The doors opened and Serena entered with her children. The triplets, now taller, more confident, walked proudly at her side. She wore a deep emerald gown, simple yet commanding, her natural beauty radiant under the lights. No one gasped this time. No one whispered scandal. Instead, the crowd straightened as though her presence demanded respect. Cameras still flashed, but the narrative was new. Strength and grace, the woman who endured, mother of truth. Serena guided her children through the hall, their laughter soft, their eyes unburdened. They no longer shrank beneath stares. They carried themselves as if the weight of denial had never existed. Every guest they passed nodded, some even applauding quietly. The dignity Adrian had tried to erase now shone brighter than any diamond in the room. Minutes later, another figure appeared at the grand entrance, Celeste. She walked alone, no hand on her arm, no shadow at her side. Her gown was ivory silk, flowing with understated elegance. Her hair swept back in a way that revealed the sharpness of her face. Reporters whispered, pens scratching. This was not Adrian's wife anymore. This was Celeste Cole, reborn, a woman who had stepped out of a gilded prison and into her own light. Serena saw her across the room. Their eyes met, no tension, no rivalry, just quiet recognition. Both had carried scars carved by the same man. Both had walked through betrayal and emerged stronger. Tonight, they shared something more than survival. They shared respect. Celeste crossed the room, heels tapping softly against marble until she reached Serena. For a moment, the room hushed as though waiting for confrontation. Instead, Celeste smiled. "You look radiant." Serena returned it with warmth. "So do you." It was not just a pleasantry. It was a testament. Two women who had endured the same storm and stood tall afterward. Narration pressed in. The gala had once been Adrian's kingdom. Tonight it was their stage. The whispers that once sliced like knives now carried reverence. The crowd did not see scandal anymore. They saw survival. They saw dignity. They saw women who had faced betrayal and chosen truth over silence. The orchestra struck up a waltz. Serena joined her children on the dance floor, guiding them with grace, laughter spilling into the air. Celeste watched, her lips curved into a small smile. She didn't envy. She didn't regret. She simply stood in her own space, free. Guests approached her, offering handshakes, congratulations, opportunities. She met them with poise, no longer the accessory of a powerful man, but the architect of her own future. By midnight, the ballroom glittered with a different kind of light. The scandals of the past had faded into lessons. The respect in the air was tangible, heavy, earned. Serena lifted her glass toward Celeste across the room. Celeste lifted hers in return. The gesture was small, but the meaning vast: solidarity, survival, and the silent promise that no man's shadow would ever define them again. Narration sealed the night. The gala had begun as a stage for power, then became a theater of betrayal. But tonight it was something else entirely. Tonight it was the gala of new beginnings. Did this story leave an impact? Please like, share, and comment your location. We'd love to know.